Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling a topic that's, well, it's pretty complex and honestly super fascinating to me at least. We're going to be talking about the lack of respect towards crossdressers.
Hmm.
And to help us kind of unpack all of this, we're going to be looking at this draft research article called Breaking Down the Barriers, Understanding the Lack of Respect Towards Crossdressers.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one.
Yeah, it really dives into like the historical roots, the societal influences, the religious aspects, all that stuff.
It's a pretty good overview. Yeah.
And then we're going to really try to understand, what this lack of respect actually looks like how it plays out in the real world for real people. You know what I mean?
Right. Because it's one thing to talk about it theoretically, but it's another to see how these attitudes actually affect people's lives.
Exactly. And when I was reading this article, it really struck me that cross-dressing isn't some new phenomenon.
Mm.
It's got a long history. Like, think about Shakespearean theater.
Oh, yeah. Back then, men played all the female roles.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
so interesting to think about that. Like, cross-dressing has been intertwined with performance and art for centuries, really.
And it's always been about challenging those gender norms in a way, pushing the boundaries of what society considers acceptable.
Yeah, and that seems to be a theme that runs throughout history, right? Like,
Yeah.
the article talks about how in the Victorian era, women wearing trousers was seen as, like, scandalous.
Oh, absolutely. Clothing and appearance have always been tied to these societal roles and expectations.
It's wild, right? Like, it's just clothing. But it's obviously about so much more than that. It's about these underlying beliefs and attitudes that shape how we perceive gender.
Yeah, it disrupts these really deep-seated norms,
Yeah.
and that can make people uncomfortable.
It's like it throws a wrench into these, like, unwritten social rules that we all just kind of, I don't know, absorb somehow.
Right, I think so, yeah. And the article really digs into how those ingrained gender norms contribute to the lack of respect towards crossdressers. It's all connected.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting how the article talks about how, like, challenging that strict male-female binary can be, well, it can be threatening to some people.
Right, because it kind of forces them to question those really fundamental categories they've built their understanding of the world on.
Exactly. It's like it makes people confront the fact that gender isn't always so clear-cut, you know?
Mm-hmm. And that can lead to, confusion, discomfort, even fear sometimes.
And the article argues that fear, that fear of anything that's different or challenges the status quo, that can lead to prejudice and discrimination. It's like a defense mechanism almost.
Almost like a way of protecting their own identity and worldview, even if it means harming others in the process.
Yeah, it's really sad. And it makes me think about the influence of religion too. Like the article mentions how certain religious doctrines have been used to, well, to condemn cross-dressing.
Oh, absolutely. There are interpretations of certain verses, like in Deuteronomy, I think it's 22.5, that have been used to kind of reinforce negative attitudes towards cross-dressing.
Right. And even though a lot of modern theologians have much more inclusive viewpoints, those traditional interpretations, they still have an impact, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. They've definitely left their mark on society. And, it's not just religion. The article also talks about how just a general lack of awareness and understanding plays a huge role. Like, many people just don't know much about cross-dressing.
So they fall back on whatever stereotypes or misconceptions they've picked up along the way.
Exactly. From the media, from their families, wherever.
That makes a lot of sense. And speaking of the media, the article really doesn't hold back when it comes to criticizing how cross-dressers are often portrayed, does it?
No, it doesn't. And it's important to be critical of those portrayals because they can really contribute to the problem.
Yeah. Like, think about all the tropes we see, The cross-dresser is the comedic relief, the deceitful character, even the criminal sometimes.
Right. And even when those portrayals are meant to be humorous, they can still end up reinforcing these harmful stereotypes.
And that just perpetuates the cycle of disrespects, right? It's like they're telling us that cross-dressing is something to be laughed at or feared.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why the article argues so strongly for more authentic and positive representation in the media. We need to see cross-dressers portrayed as the complex, interesting individuals they are, with their own unique stories and experiences.
Right, like real people. And it's not just about showing them, it's about letting them tell their own stories in their own voices.
Yeah, giving them agency and control over their own narratives.
Exactly. And when those narratives are missing, it creates this vacuum.
Yeah.
And that vacuum gets filled with all those harmful stereotypes.
Exactly. And that can have a real impact on people's lives.
Right. So I'm kind of curious. We've been talking a lot about the broader context, but I'm wondering, how does this lack of respect, both in the media and in everyday life, how does it actually affect cross-dressers? Like, what are the real-world consequences?
Well, imagine constantly facing rejection, ridicule, even violence, just for expressing yourself authentically, you know? That takes a toll.
I can only imagine. It must be exhausting.
It is. And the article cites studies that show a link between experiencing this kind of disrespect and a higher risk of mental health issues, like depression and anxiety.
That's awful. It's like people are being punished for just being themselves.
Mm.
And it's not just about emotional well-being either, right? Like, the article talks about some pretty tangible consequences, too.
Right. Think about the workplace, for example. Imagine being passed over for a promotion or facing discrimination just because of how you dress, or even just navigating public spaces where you're constantly being stared at, whispered about, sometimes even harassed. It's a lot to deal with.
It's like it creates this feeling of not belonging, of being constantly othered. And that must be incredibly isolating.
It is. And in some parts of the world, it goes beyond just social stigma. There are countries with actual laws and policies that discriminate against cross-dressers.
Really? Like, it's literally illegal to be a cross-dresser in some places.
Unfortunately, yes. These laws, they violate basic human rights. They also legitimize prejudice and create this really dangerous environment for people who just want to express themselves. It's a stark reminder of how much work still needs to be done.
It's heartbreaking, honestly. It's clear that this lack of respect has a profound impact on people's lives. It creates emotional distress, social isolation, even legal barriers. But I'm hoping the article offers some solutions, some ways to address this. We can't just leave it there, can we?
You're right, the article does offer some hope, and we'll delve into those potential solutions in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we just spent, like, the last half hour talking about some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Prejudice, the stigma, the really real consequences that cross-dressers face. But, and this is a big but, the article doesn't just, like, leave us hanging there.
Yeah.
It actually offers some, like, real solutions, some paths forward.
It does, yeah. And I think one of the most important things, like the most powerful tools we have, is education.
Yeah.
Because when they don't understand something, they tend to like fall back on stereotypes and misconceptions. You know what I mean?
Right. They fill in the gaps with whatever they've heard or seen, even if it's not accurate.
Exactly. So we need these like comprehensive education programs in schools, workplaces, communities, like everywhere to address that lack of knowledge.
So it's about like giving people the information they need to challenge their own biases, their own assumptions.
Yeah, exactly. These programs, they can like dive into the history of cross-dressing, the different experiences within the community, like the fact that it's not a monolith.
Right. Everyone's different.
Exactly. And they can also talk about, the harmful effects of prejudice and discrimination and like really encourage empathy and understanding.
And maybe even like create a space for open dialogue.
Oh, absolutely. Like a safe space where people can ask questions, challenge their own perspectives, without feeling judged.
Yeah. That's so important because I think sometimes people are afraid to ask questions, for fear of sounding ignorant or insensitive.
Right. But we can't learn and grow if we're not willing to ask those questions.
Exactly. So education is key, but it doesn't stop there, right? Like the article also talks about the role of media representation. And we talked earlier about how negative portrayals can be so damaging.
Oh, absolutely. They reinforce those stereotypes. They contribute to the stigma. It's a real problem.
Right. But then the flip side is that positive and authentic representation can actually do the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Like it can help normalize cross-dressing, challenge those biases.
Exactly. We need to see cross-dressers portrayed as like real people, not caricatures, not punchlines.
Yeah, like multidimensional individuals with their own stories, their own complexities.
Exactly. And it's not just about quantity, it's about quality too, We need to move beyond those tokenistic representations and make sure that cross-dressers have a real voice in how they're being portrayed.
So it's about giving them agency, giving them control over their own narratives.
Yes, exactly. And that's a huge part of creating a more respectful and accurate representation.
And I think, another piece of this puzzle is legal protections.
Oh, absolutely. Things like anti-discrimination laws, hate crime legislation, inclusive policies, those are all essential for creating a society where cross-dressers feel safe and protected.
Yeah. It's about leveling the playing field, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that everyone has the same rights and opportunities, regardless of how they express their gender.
Exactly. And it sends a message that discrimination is not okay, that it won't be tolerated.
Yeah. And, the article also emphasizes the importance of allyship.
Hmm.
Like, what can individuals do to actually support cross-dressers and advocate for change?
Well, I think one of the most important things is just to be an active ally, you
Yeah.
know?
Okay, how do you do that?
It's about standing with cross-dressers, amplifying their voices, challenging prejudice and discrimination whenever you see it.
So it's not just about, like, being nice to people. It's
Right.
about actually taking action.
Exactly. And sometimes that action can be really simple, like correcting someone who misgenders a crossdresser or speaking up when you hear a harmful joke.
Right, like those little everyday moments can actually make a difference.
They can, yeah. Because they create this culture where those kinds of comments are just not acceptable.
And it also shows support for the person who's being targeted.
Exactly. And, you can also support organizations that advocate for LGBTQ plus rights. You can donate to causes that promote inclusivity. You can volunteer your time. There are so many ways to get involved.
So it's about putting your money where your mouth is,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, exactly. It's about aligning your values with your actions. And, beyond those individual actions, the article also talks about the importance of building supportive communities.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like creating those safe spaces where people can connect, share their experiences, find support.
Exactly. Those spaces can be so valuable, especially for people who are facing stigma and discrimination. It's a place where they can feel seen, heard, understood.
Yeah. And maybe even like empowered to be themselves more fully.
Absolutely. And these communities can exist online, offline. There's so many different forms they can take. But the key is that they provide that sense of belonging, of validation, of solidarity.
So, we've talked about education, media representation, legal protections, allyship, building communities. It sounds like there's a lot we can do.
There is. And it can feel overwhelming, I know.
Yeah, it can. Like, where do we even begin? What's the most important takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that change is possible. We've come a long way, and we can keep moving forward. But it requires all of us to get involved, to challenge our own biases, to take action, to support each other.
So it's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in this.
Absolutely. And this isn't just about cross-dressers, It's about challenging all kinds of societal norms, embracing diversity, creating a world where everyone feels free to express themselves authentically.
That's a great point. It's about creating a more just and equitable world for everyone. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
Yeah, we have.
Like from the history of cross-dressing to like all the kind of societal and religious things that, kind of shape how people view it.
Right.
It's clear that it's a really complex issue. But as we move to this last part, I want to kind of shift our focus to something a little bit different, like the power of individual action. What can we as individuals do?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of this issue. It's so deeply rooted in society. But I think it's important to remember that change really does start with individuals. Each one of us can make a difference.
Yeah. I love that. Like it's empowering to think about, like even small actions can kind of ripple outwards.
Exactly.
But I guess the question is like, what does that actually look like? Like, what are some like practical things, concrete things that people listening can do?
Well, I think one of the most important things is just to educate yourself, the more you learn about cross-dressing, the better equipped you'll be to challenge those misconceptions and advocate for understanding.
Yeah, like knowledge is power.
Right.
Like the more we understand something, the less likely we are to rely on those stereotypes and assumptions.
Right. And it doesn't have to be anything, super complicated. Just read articles, watch documentaries, seek out voices from the community, really immerse yourself in those lived experiences.
Yeah, and it's not just about like learning for ourselves either, right? Like it's about sharing that knowledge with others.
Oh, absolutely. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues, just have those open and honest conversations about cross-dressing. And if you hear someone making a harmful joke or perpetuating a stereotype, challenge them on it.
Yeah, don't be afraid to speak up.
Exactly. Those conversations, they can be so powerful in shifting perspectives and creating a more inclusive environment.
And it makes it like more okay to talk about these things, right?
Yeah, normalizes those discussions.
Yeah. What about those situations where we actually see like disrespect or discrimination happening, like what can we do in those moments?
Don't be a bystander, like speak up, whether it's correcting someone who misgenders a crossdresser
Yeah.
or intervening if you see someone being harassed or bullied. Like your voice matters.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like sending a message that that behavior is not okay.
Exactly. And I know it can be, uncomfortable to speak up in those situations, but those small acts of courage, they can make a huge difference for someone who's feeling marginalized or unsafe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Mhm.
about like creating that culture where disrespect is just like not tolerated. And
Yeah.
and I think that's where allyship comes in, right?
Mhm.
Like it's about using our voices and our actions to actually support the community.
Yes, absolutely. And allyship goes beyond just words,
Right.
It's about taking concrete action, like support organizations that are working to advance LGBTQ plus rights, donate to causes that promote inclusivity, or volunteer your time. Like all of those things, they add up.
Yeah. Like it's about putting your values into action. And I think, one of the most powerful things that I took away from the article is this idea that like by celebrating diversity, we not only enrich our own lives, but we create a more vibrant and just society for everyone.
Yeah. That's a beautiful way to put it. And it really gets to the heart of why this conversation is so important,
Yeah.
like by embracing and celebrating that diversity of human expression, we challenge those rigid norms, we broaden our perspectives and we create a world where authenticity is valued.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the lack of respect towards cross-dressers, I want to leave you with this final thought. How will you contribute to creating a more respectful and accepting world? Remember that every action, no matter how small, can make a difference. Keep learning, keep challenging those biases, and keep speaking up for what's right. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep diving deep.